My name is Margaret Williams, and if you've ever believed in the American dream, you might think my story is one of triumph. A young widow, working day and night, raising two boys on her own, turning every hardship into strength. That's what people saw when they looked at me. But what they didn't see was the ending of my story, an ending no mother ever imagines. I was only 29 when my husband, Richard, was killed in a car accident. Overnight, my life shattered. Suddenly I was alone, standing in a small house in Cleveland, Ohio, with two little boys, Daniel and Michael, clinging to me, their eyes filled with questions I couldn't answer. I didn't have time to grieve. My sons needed food, clothes, and a future. So I worked, and I worked hard. At dawn, I would pack their lunches, walk them to school, and then take the bus to the diner where I waited tables until my feet throbbed. At night, I cleaned offices, emptying trash bins and scrubbing floors while the city slept. Some nights I'd come home so exhausted I could barely lift my head. But the moment those little arms wrapped around me, whispering, "We love you, Mom," every ache disappeared. I gave up everything for them. New clothes, vacations, even simple pleasures. I denied myself all of it so my sons could have what I never had. When Christmas came and money was tight, I stitched toys out of old fabric scraps. When school trips needed payment, I skipped meals to make sure they could go. People often told me, "Margaret, you're spoiling them," but how could I think of myself when their smiles were the only reward I ever needed? And oh, how proud I was as they grew. Daniel was sharp and ambitious, always talking about business and big plans. Michael was thoughtful, determined to become a lawyer. I dreamed of their future the way other women dream of their own. I imagined graduation days, wedding days, grandchildren laughing in my kitchen. Most of all, I imagined the moment when they'd look at me and say, "Mom, it's your turn to rest. Let us take care of you now." I clung to that dream through every long night of work, through every bill I struggled to pay. But here's the truth no one prepares you for. Sometimes the very children you sacrifice everything for grow up to be strangers. Sometimes the promises they made, the words that kept you alive, become nothing but empty echoes. Because the day finally came when my sons did tell me it was my turn to rest. But their idea of rest wasn't what I had dreamed. It wasn't comfort, or gratitude, or love. It was a nursing home, a place where they could leave me behind while they lived the lives I had built for them. And that's how my story of sacrifice became a story of betrayal. Life after Richard's death was nothing short of a battlefield. Every day felt like a fight not against people, but against hunger, bills, and exhaustion. Yet, when I looked at my boys, I found the strength to fight again. Daniel was 6 when his father passed, old enough to notice the empty chair at the dinner table. Michael was only 4, too young to understand why Daddy never came home. At night, when Michael cried, I would hold him close and whisper, "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here. Mommy will always be here." The truth was, I wasn't sure how I was going to make it. My waitress job at the diner barely paid enough to cover rent, and the mortgage on our little house in Cleveland loomed over me like a dark cloud. But giving up was never an option. I woke up at 5 every morning, packed peanut butter sandwiches into brown paper bags, and walked my boys to school. Then I'd catch the bus to the diner, where I spent hours, balancing trays of pancakes and coffee for strangers who barely looked at me. By the time I got home, my feet were blistered, my back sore, but I would still cook dinner and help Daniel with his math homework or listen to Michael read out loud from his storybooks. At night, when most mothers tucked their children in and rested, I put on another uniform. The city's tall glass buildings were my second workplace. I scrubbed toilets, emptied trash bins, and polished floors until the smell of bleach clung to my skin. Sometimes I came home past midnight, collapsing on the couch, But even then, I made sure their school clothes were washed and their lunches ready for the next day. There were times we had so little that I skipped meals so they could eat. I remember one winter when the heating bill was too high, I wrapped them in blankets and pretended we were camping inside the house. They laughed, believing it was a game, while I quietly prayed for spring. Holidays were the hardest. Other families had shining trees and presents stacked high. I couldn't afford that. One Christmas, I stayed up all night sewing little stuffed animals from old fabric scraps. When the boys opened them, their faces lit up like I had given them the world. "You're the best mom ever," Daniel whispered, hugging me tight. That moment erased every pain in my body. Those boys were my purpose. Every sacrifice, every long shift, every sleepless night, I did it with love, believing it was building their future. I told myself it was temporary, that one day all this struggle would be worth it. And it seemed to be working. Daniel grew up confident, dreaming of becoming a businessman. Michael, gentle but determined, wanted to be a lawyer. Their eyes were filled with ambition, and I was proud beyond words. I thought I was planting seeds that would grow into gratitude, loyalty, and love. What I didn't know was that the harvest waiting for me was heartbreak. By the time Daniel entered college and Michael was finishing high school, I thought my sacrifices were finally paying off. Daniel talked endlessly about business, investments, and the kind of life he wanted to build in New York City. Michael, with his calm determination, had his eyes set on law school in Chicago. The day Daniel graduated, I sat in the crowded auditorium, clutching my hands together, tears streaming down my cheeks as his name was called. "That's my son," I whispered proudly, though no one was listening. When Michael crossed the stage years later in his black gown, I felt the same rush of joy. For a moment, it seemed like all the long nights, the empty stomachs, the years of hard labor had been worth it. I believed, with all my heart, that now life would finally get easier, that my boys would stand beside me, just as I had stood for them. But life has a cruel way of revealing the truth. Daniel's calls grew shorter, his visits fewer. "Work is crazy, Mom," he would say whenever I asked when I'd see him. At first, I believed him. After all, New York was fast-paced. But weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. Michael, too, changed once he started working at the law firm. He used to call me every Sunday, telling me about his cases, laughing at my stories. But soon, even those calls stopped. When I phoned him, his tone was rushed, almost impatient. "Mom, I'm in the middle of something important. Can we talk later?" But later rarely came. The silence in my house grew heavier with each passing year. The walls that once echoed with laughter now held nothing but memories. I would sit by the window at night, clutching old photographs, whispering their names into the emptiness. Neighbors would ask, "Do your boys visit often, Margaret?" I would smile, forcing brightness into my voice. "Oh yes, they're just busy. They'll come when they can," but inside, I was breaking. One Christmas, I asked Michael if he could come home. "Just for a few days, sweetheart. It's been so long since we celebrated together." There was a long pause before he sighed. "Flights are expensive, Mom, maybe next year." That next year never came. And then came the hardest moment. Daniel finally visited after nearly 3 years. I cooked his favorite meal, roast chicken with mashed potatoes, and waited at the window like a young girl waiting for her sweetheart. When he walked in, tall and polished in his designer suit, my heart leapt. I hugged him tight. But he pulled away quickly, his eyes scanning the house. "Mom, this place, it's falling apart. You can't keep living like this." His tone wasn't filled with concern. It was distant, cold like a stranger's. That was the first time I realized my boys were no longer mine. Daniel's visit that night left me unsettled. He barely touched the food I had cooked, and instead spent most of the evening talking about finances. investments, and how much potential the property had. "Mom," he said, swirling the wine in his glass, "you're living alone in this big house. It's too much for you. The roof needs fixing. The heating system is ancient, and honestly, this neighborhood isn't what it used to be." I tried to smile, though my chest tightened. "It's old, yes, but it's home. This is where I raised you boys. Every corner has a memory." Daniel didn't soften. "Memories don't pay bills. You need to think practically. A senior facility would take care of you, and we could handle the property in a way that benefits everyone." I froze at his words. Handle the property? My home was not an investment. It was my life. When Michael visited a few weeks later, he echoed Daniel's words almost exactly, as though they had rehearsed it together. "Mom, you'll be safer in a nursing home," he said firmly, adjusting his tie like he was in court. "They'll have doctors, nurses, activities, people your age. You won't have to struggle anymore." "But I'm not struggling," I protested. "I manage Finet. I still garden, I still cook." Michael shook his head. "That's not the point. You shouldn't have to. You deserve rest. And honestly, it's irresponsible for you to stay here alone. What if something happens? What if you fall?" I looked at him, searching his eyes for compassion, but all I saw was distance. In the weeks that followed, they kept pressing. Phone calls turned into subtle pressure, then blunt insistence. "Mom, it's not safe. Mom, it's time to let go. Mom, stop being stubborn." One night, Daniel brought papers. "Just sign these, Mom. It'll make the transition easier. We'll take care of everything." I held the pen but couldn't move. My hand shook. Something inside me screamed that this wasn't love, it was business. My boys weren't talking to me as sons. They were treating me like a burden, or worse, an obstacle. I tried to resist, tried to tell them that I was fine, that I wanted to stay in my home until my last breath. But the more I spoke, the more they dismissed me, as though my words carried no weight. Finally, one Sunday afternoon, Michael arrived with two men I'd never met. "They're from the senior living facility, Mom. They'll explain everything." I sat there, numb, as strangers described comfortable rooms, daily care, and medical support. Their words blurred into noise. I looked at my sons, the boys I once held close, the boys I sacrificed everything for, and I realized the truth. They had already decided. My voice didn't matter anymore. The day they took me to the nursing home felt like a funeral, only I was still alive. Michael drove me in his sleek black car, speaking little, while Daniel followed behind. My suitcase, just one, though I had lived in my house for decades, sat on the back seat like a silent witness to my defeat. I clutched my hands together and stared out the window, trying not to cry. When we pulled up, the sign read Maplewood Senior Living. The building was clean, modern, and cold. A cheerful woman in a bright uniform greeted us at the door, her smile wide but hollow. "Welcome, Margaret. You're going to love it here." I nodded politely, though my heart was breaking. They showed me to my room. It was small, just a bed, a dresser, and a single window that overlooked a parking lot. No garden, no familiar trees, no worn kitchen table where I once served cookies to little boys with sticky fingers. Just walls painted beige, stripped of everything that made life feel like life. "Isn't this nice, Mom?" Daniel said, forcing enthusiasm. "You'll have company, meals prepared, everything you need." I tried to smile, but the tears slipped out anyway. "It's fine," I whispered. The cheerful woman left us alone to settle in. Michael adjusted my suitcase on the dresser. "We'll visit often, Mom. You won't even notice the difference." But deep down, I already knew the truth. That night, after they left, the silence was unbearable. I sat on the bed, staring at the suitcase, feeling as though I had been abandoned by the very people I lived for. Other residents shuffled past my door, some in wheelchairs, some muttering to themselves. I was one of them now. At dinner, I sat at a long table with strangers. Some stared blankly at their plates, others spoke in half-finished sentences. A kind old woman named Ruth introduced herself, but my mind was elsewhere on the empty chair at my old kitchen table, on the home that was no longer mine. When I returned to my room, I noticed something that made my stomach sink. My wedding ring, which I had left on the nightstand at home, wasn't with me. Neither were the photo albums I had treasured. My sons had packed only what they thought I needed, but to me, those memories were the only things that mattered. Days turned into weeks. The routine was suffocating: wake up, eat, take pills, sit in the common room, sleep. Staff members smiled, but their eyes were tired. Residents came and went. Some left in ambulances, never to return. I kept waiting for Daniel or Michael to visit. At first, I told myself they were busy. But as the weeks stretched on, reality set in. They had moved on with their lives. I, their mother, the woman who gave them everything, was now just another forgotten old woman in a beige room. It was a rainy afternoon when I first overheard the truth. I was sitting in the lounge, a blanket wrapped around my knees, while two staff members chatted nearby. "Did you see that big colonial house on Maple Street finally sold?" One whispered. "Oh yes, that was the Thompson place, right? Such a shame. Her sons put it up for sale so quickly after moving her here." My breath caught. Maple Street. That was my street, my house, my life. I clutched the arms of my chair, my heart racing. When the staff noticed me staring, they quickly changed the subject. But I already knew. That evening, I called Daniel. My hands shook as I held the phone. "Daniel," I began, my voice trembling, "is it true? Did you sell the house?" There was silence on the line, then a sigh. "Mom, listen. It was for the best. The house needed too much work. And besides, you don't live there anymore." My throat tightened. "But Daniel, that was our home. Your father built that house with his hands. Every brick has a memory. How could you?" "Mom," his voice turned sharp. "You don't understand. Michael and I took a loan against the property. We had debts, investments. Selling was the only option. You'll be fine here. Stop worrying about things that don't matter anymore." Things that don't matter anymore. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from beneath me. All those years, every sacrifice, every late night shift, every meal I skipped so my boys could eat, and now, the very roof I fought to keep over our heads was gone. The next day, Michael visited. He brought flowers, setting them in a vase on the small dresser. "Mom, please don't be upset," he said smoothly, as if he were addressing a client in court. We had no choice. Daniel's investments didn't work out, and I had student loans piling up. We used the house as collateral, and when things went bad, well, the bank took it. Selling was the only way to clean it up. His words felt like knives. "So you risked my home, the place where I raised you. You gambled away everything we had." Michael looked away. "It's complicated." "No, Michael," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It's simple. You chose money over your mother." He didn't answer. He just adjusted his tie, kissed my forehead mechanically, and left. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my heart heavy with betrayal. I wasn't just abandoned, I had been robbed by the very children I once trusted with my life. And the cruelest part, I still loved them. Despite everything, I still longed for them to walk through the door and call me Mom with warmth, not calculation. But I finally understood. To them, I was no longer family. I was just an obstacle they had cleared. Days of Maplewood blended together like grey clouds, one indistinguishable from the next. Morning medication, tasteless meals, half-hearted conversations with strangers who often forgot my name. Minutes after learning it, I became part of the background, another old woman in a wheelchair, another patient to be checked off a list. Sometimes I would wake up at dawn and stare out the small window of my room. Cars would pull into the parking lot, families visiting their loved ones. Laughter floated through the hallways on weekends when children came to see their grandparents. But no one came for me. Every time I heard footsteps in the corridor, my heart leapt, hoping it might be Daniel or Michael. But it was always a nurse, a volunteer, or worse, silence returning after the echo faded. One afternoon, Ruth, the kind woman I had met on my first night, sat beside me in the lounge. Her hands were frail, her eyes soft with understanding. "You're waiting for them, aren't you?" she asked gently. I nodded, unable to hide my tears. They promised they'd visit, but promises don't mean much anymore. Ruth squeezed my hand. "Children, they forget. They build new lives, and sometimes they leave us behind. But you must hold on to yourself. You're still here." Her words touched me, yet the ache inside wouldn't go away. Because I didn't just miss my sons, I missed the life I had built for them. The home I had poured my soul into. The laughter that once filled my kitchen, all gone. The staff tried to keep us active, bingo nights, movie screenings, craft sessions. But I wasn't interested in paper flowers or reruns of old films. I wanted real flowers in my garden. I wanted the smell of fresh pie cooling on my counter. I wanted the voices of my boys calling, "Mom, what's for dinner?" Instead, I sat in a circle of strangers, pretending to be entertained while my heart grew heavier each day. One evening, I overheard a nurse whispering to another, "That's Margaret, the one whose sons sold her house. Poor thing. She doesn't even realize how badly they treated her." I did realize. I realized every night when I cried into my pillow, praying for some miracle that would bring back the sons I thought I knew. Weeks stretched into months. My health began to falter. Climbing out of bed felt harder, my legs weaker. The doctors prescribed more pills, but no medicine could cure the hollowness inside me. On my birthday, the staff brought a small cake with a single candle. They sang, smiling kindly. I forced myself to smile back, but my eyes searched the doorway, desperate for my sons. They never came. As the candle flickered out, I made a silent wish, not for wealth, not for health, but simply for my boys to remember the woman who gave them everything. But the room stayed quiet, and I knew my wish had dissolved into the same emptiness that now defined my life. Winter settled over Maplewood like a heavy blanket. Snow drifted outside my window, coating the world in white silence. I often sat and watched the flakes fall, remembering how Daniel and Michael once begged me to let them build snowmen in the yard. I would bundle them in scarves and mittens, laugh as they threw snowballs at each other, and serve them hot cocoa by the fireplace afterward. Now I watched the snow alone, my hands trembling too much to even hold a mug steady. My health was failing quickly. Breathing became shallow, my chest heavy. The nurses grew gentler around me, their voices softer. I could see it in their eyes. They knew my time was short. One evening, Ruth visited my room. She sat by my bed, her voice a whisper. "Margaret, do you want me to call your sons?" I smiled weakly. "No, Ruth, if they wanted to be here, they would have come already." It hurt to say it aloud, but it was the truth. My sons had chosen their paths, and those paths no longer included me. Lying in that narrow bed, I thought about everything, my sacrifices, my love, the nights I stayed awake working, the mornings I packed lunches, the birthdays I made special with homemade cakes even when money was tight. I thought about how I once believed love would be enough to keep a family together. But love, I realized, cannot survive alone. It needs respect. It needs gratitude. Without those, love becomes a chain, binding one while the other walks free. And yet, I could not hate them. Even after everything, my heart still beat with a mother's love. I prayed for their happiness, prayed they would one day understand what they had done, not for my sake, but for their own souls. The staff gathered in the lounge one Sunday to play old hymns on the piano. From my room, I heard the soft music drifting through the halls. For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined I was back in church with my boys beside me. Their small voices singing off-key, their hands holding mine. Tears rolled down my cheeks, not from anger, but from a bittersweet peace. Because I finally understood the lesson of my life. Sacrifice is not always rewarded. Love is not always returned, and children are not always what we hope they will become. But giving love is never wasted, because it defines who we are, not what we receive. As the snow continued to fall outside my window, I whispered my final prayer. Lord, forgive them. They knew not what they did. And thank you for giving me the strength to love, even when I was forgotten. That night, I drifted into sleep with a quiet heart. Forgotten by the world, betrayed by my own flesh and blood yet still. In the silence, I remained what I had always been, a mother. The morning after that snowy night, the nurses found me lying peacefully in bed, my hands folded over my chest. I was gone. No drama, no final words to my sons, just silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than 1,000 cries. News was sent to Daniel and Michael. They arrived a few days later, dressed in their sharp suits, their faces pale but composed. They didn't weep. Instead, they spoke to the administrator about paperwork, about transferring what little remained of my belongings. A vase of wilted flowers, a sweater, a Bible with my handwriting in the margins. At my funeral, only a handful of people came. Ruth was there, her frail hands folded as she prayed for me. Some staff members attended out of kindness, but my sons stood at the front, their eyes darting more toward their phones than my coffin. There were no heartfelt eulogies, no stories of my sacrifices. Just a quiet ceremony that ended as quickly as it began. To them, it seemed like closing a chapter in a book they no longer wished to read. And yet, life has a way of revealing the truth. Months later, Daniel's investments failed completely. Michael, too, faced lawsuits that dragged his name through courtrooms. Without the foundation of the house they had stolen, without the anchor of a mother's love, their empire of greed crumbled. They had gained money, but lost their souls, and in the end, even money slipped away. Neighbors who once admired them whispered behind their backs. Those were the boys who abandoned their mother. No wonder their lives turned out this way. The same community that once respected our family now looked at them with pity, even disgust. They had houses, cars, accounts, but no home, no peace. Meanwhile, my memory lived quietly in the hearts of those who truly cared. Ruth often lit a candle for me in the chapel at Maplewood. Few kind nurses remembered me as the gentle lady who never stopped loving her sons. And perhaps that was my true legacy, not the house, not the money, but the love I carried until my final breath. Dear listener, this is not just my story. It is a warning, a plea, and a truth written in the lives of many forgotten parents. A mother's love is the purest gift in this world. It cannot be measured in dollars, in property, or in debts repaid. It is priceless. But too often, children realize this only when it is too late, when the chair at the table is empty, when the voice that once called them "my baby" is gone forever. So if you still have your mother, cherish her, visit her, hold her hand. Because the greatest tragedy is not when a parent dies, it is when a parent lives, forgotten and unloved by the very children for whom they sacrificed everything. And when that happens, it is not the parent who is truly poor, it is the children.